Sabrina 90s comic issue 11. I wish the title would be a little less obvious. I wonder if this is going to be the comic spin on a certain episode of the show. Sabrina panics because she's got 5 minutes for a date with Harvey and doesn't know what to wear. Then she uses magic in front of the mirror to see herself in a bunch of different great outfits. But for some reason, Sabrina's reflection has a mind of her own and lives in the mirror world with all the other reflections. Did some powerful witch out there use magic to make it so that this would be the case because she was lonely? But considering how I guess the plot will go, that won't make sense. Unless that witch wanted to see good versions of her own evil family members. Why is the mirror a portal to a parallel universe? How long Sabrina had this mirror? Was it recently taken out of the closet or attic and her aunts didn't get to warn her? This premise makes no sense. Even Penders did it better. I found it easier to believe that a portal to another world should show up for no reason on Mobius, because it was a world where a few people with magical powers were born, no big deal, implying that it has tons of magic already that could eventually break down reality and create a portal anywhere. Portals in the form of warp rings show up at the end of Sonic 1 levels. But this is a normal mortal Earth. Can't Sabrina see the mirror's face smirk and immediately realize that it has to be evil? I'm excited to see this story, but it's arbitrary as hell. Can't she just be pulled into a parallel universe without the mirror being a thing? Sabrina's told that through this mirror exists a dimension where everything is opposite, and she's too stupid to immediately realize that this means opposite morality as well. So she says that she wants to meet her mirror world counterpart. She's told that she's very tricky. That should immediately change her mind, but instead she insists on it, even though the reflection is right there. So she's already talking to her. Why isn't Sabrina uncomfortable with the fact that she's at a sentient mirror in her room where she changes clothes every day? Wouldn't the mirror be miserable with life and horribly bored by having sentience without being able to move and do stuff? What kind of cruel, sadistic bastard would give a mirror sentience? This is the kind of lazy plot where the writer didn't think things through at all because it just raises nothing but questions trying to get the story to happen. I like the extra touch that Sabrina's evil twin has the name Sabrina spelled backwards. But at the same time, I really don't. The name looks horrible and I feel bad for her for that. Katrina was a better name for an evil twin for her, even if she had an unfortunate namesake that made it a bit too suited to an evil twin. So Newbie tells Sabrina that she's been gaining weight. Then Sabrina idiotically says that she'll show her up close and personal when she's already close up enough. So clearly she just said that to make fun of her. She goes into the mirror to show her just as close seeming as before, and Newbie immediately goes into the real world because of that giant idiot moment. Newbie can escape into the real world just fine while Sabrina can't. I guess the spell that keeps the reflections trapped in the mirror universe can't differentiate between the good and evil twin. But that's very stupid because obviously they'd have different brains from having different life experiences and demeanors. They'd be distinguishable just fine. And it's not like we saw Newbie cast a spell to trap Sabrina in the mirror. If she has magic at all, I'd have to wonder how she hasn't zapped herself out of that place. I guess the enchantment against leaving it was really powerful. At least Newbie lampshaded that Sabrina was a dimwit here, but why does this mirror universe exist? She says that she wants to have some fun, as if she couldn't have fun in her own universe, and tapes the mouth of the mirror shut. Oh, that wouldn't be suspicious at all. None of Sabrina's aunts would question not only her acting completely out of character, but also this. Even getting rid of the mirror should completely give it away to them. If they're experienced enough with magic to find the unpronounceable and forgettable name of that depowering root familiar, when it could have been centuries since they read about it, you'd think they would realize what happened the minute Sabrina acted evil and the mirror was hidden. They'd figure things out the minute they went into Sabrina's room. Of course, if Newbie used magic to erase the aunts' memories of the concept of a mirror universe, it would justify them not knowing exactly what was going on. But they'd still know she was acting really differently if she tried to ruin her reputation, and they might assume it was a spell gone awry and try to undo the spell, which could end up turning her good from a niceness spell. This plot is just one frustrating idiot ball after another. Who could be this stupid? Sabrina knows this is the universe where her evil twin lives, and yet she immediately thinks it's a good idea to go talk to evil Harvey, and call him Harvey. Also, he doesn't even tell her that Harvey isn't his name, so things aren't even trying to be consistent. At least I'm not being able to stand someone who thinks is the evil Sabrina does make sense. But this would be a prime moment for him to build on Anibra's character by explaining things she did to make him hate her. He could not actually be evil and just hate her. I definitely read the story before. I know I have this. Let me guess. The evil version of Sabrina's aunts are going to be men, right? Which would make me wonder why evil Harvey and Anibra's weren't gender swapped too, actually. Yep, they're men. And Salem is a dog. Sabrina pets Salem right away, and he doesn't go on to ask why she doesn't remember him. And nobody questions the fact that she's petting Salem instead of being evil. Why wouldn't Salem have run away from her in fear, anticipating that she'd kick him? Why wouldn't they have given up the dog to protect it from her? Is Anibra's actually just as willing to pet him as her? But telling us that would be interesting. Sabrina then says in surprise that she lives with her two uncles, and not Zelda just says she's right and tells her to come on home, instead of asking if she got amnesia and being concerned at all. Oh, finally, some smart writing happens. When Sabrina explains that she's Sabrina and not her evil twin, she's believed immediately because she seems so nice, which she proved earlier by casually petting Salem and not knowing who he is. Then the not Hilda and Zelda, who I don't even know the names of, complain that they got duped because the reflection isn't the same gender. How could the reflection be the wrong gender? Its appearance would have to be the same. That's physics. This really does have to be a universe that's very specifically meant to show Sabrina how the opposite is like for her, not everyone else. How could Hilda's reflection look nothing like her? I wouldn't be surprised if this contradicted a previous issue, or a future issue. Like the one where Sabrina first gave her and Zelda makeovers to look modern. Wouldn't they have looked in the mirror after that and we'd see their reflections at some point? If they didn't look like their new makeovers, they wouldn't even be able to notice how they looked. Speaking of the rules not being kept consistent, the male Hilda and Zelda are good people. Or at least they're pretending to be right now, I don't know. I expected them to be jerks, and I've read the story before, so maybe they're a really forgettable part of the story personality-wise. Not Hilda says that he feels really sorry for Sabrina's aunts because he'll have to deal with the evil Sabrina. They're not evil twins, but Sabrina's reflection is evil? So why is she evil? So Anibra's plays loud music and dances in Sabrina's room with a spilled drink near her. And Sabrina's aunts immediately ask what's gotten into her. And Anibra's dumbass response is that she's just living in the real world. And she's in Sabrina's room. All they'd have to do is see that the mirror's gone and take into account how obvious a clue that response was. She could have said anything else. What she's doing is selfish, but it's not really evil. So what if she wants to dance and listen to music? What's evil is that she's doing it too loud for no reason. Literally no reason. Her uncles are nice, so it's not like she was turned rebellious and bitter by them. Harvey's impressed by Anibra's and says she looks different, when she's identical to Sabrina. So she has to be showing him these clothes for the first time. Zelda wants her to clean up her mess before she leaves. Probably just so she can punish her for playing the music too loud in her house, because Zelda could clean up the mess in a second with magic. Anibra's tells her she should do it herself because she could use the exercise. To be fair, exercise is good for most people, but that's also a fat insult, which is rude. Anibra's then says she's been reflecting, dropping another obvious hint. It's like she wants to be found out. I don't see how this is funny. Zelda wants to ask Salem what's going on with Sabrina, and he says that her favorite mirror is missing. She could have replaced it. Zelda hates the mirror because it makes her look like a man. I love that she talks as if only that mirror does that. Okay, so that clears things up. Zelda and Hilda hear a rumble from the attic, because the mirror was smart enough to wait until Anibra's left the house before making noise to get their attention. So they rescue her and find out the truth just like that, because Anibra's was unbelievably stupid enough to not destroy the mirror, or teleport her to another universe. Salem fortunately explains that Sabrina's father had left her this mirror, and he always knew it was a bad idea. Why did her father think it was a good idea? Wouldn't he have found out it was a stupid one? Well, at least it keeps things from getting too dark that Sabrina's aunts almost immediately find out what's really going on. If the writer was just going for cheap drama, he'd have them take forever to find out. But on the bright side, because witches can erase memories at will, the stakes in this story are surprisingly low because anything that Anibras does to spurn Sabrina's loved ones can just be undone and erased from their memories. But the problem is, Sabrina would only know to erase a memory if the person made it clear to her that she saw Anibras misbehaving on that exact day, and exactly what she did, and that's why he has a grudge against her now. If Anibras made an enemy out of a whole bunch of different students in the school, it's not like Sabrina would have to approach them all individually and ask what they saw one by one, because she was able to erase the memories of the audience of everybody who watched a TV show twice without actually personally meeting them. And then she'd have to erase their memories of the fact that she used magic in front of them to erase their memory of Anibras. Then we see Amy in the mirror universe call Sabrina her old friend, and she wants her to do shopping and then do her hair. Her smirk implies that she's still evil, so that's a missed opportunity. Huh? At least Pender's kept things simple, having every main character be the moral opposite. And with infinite realities, that'd be a possibility eventually. If Amy likes her because she's evil, then why does she... We need a better explanation than that, because the evil Sabrina would have treated Amy even worse. Sabrina specifically said that if she was really evil, she'd have gotten rid of Amy to date Brad on her. I love that Hilda calls Anibras Sabrina by mistake at first. Even I had to constantly struggle not to do that because they look the same. And they make the common sense decision of bringing the mirror with her so she can immediately get Anibras back home. I love that the mirror says, "Oh goody, I never get out." Anibras finds a picnic boring. She then decides to entertain herself, saying she'll jazz things up a bit and creating a tornado to go after people. She's a sociopath, calling people wimps because some hail falls on them. She could just easily zap up a cell phone that's playing videos like TV shows. I was gonna say a TV. A TV would be too suspicious. And Zelda said she's gotta get her back home before Harvey finally figures out she's a witch, which should have been made obvious the second that it started hailing before winter and a tornado showed up with no tornado warning alarm ahead of time, right after she said she'd make things less boring, with no normal way of doing so. Zelda asks Harvey to pick up a hanky for him, which distracts him while Hilda sneaks up on Anibras and puts the mirror over her. Why was this mirror invented? Wouldn't someone who wanted a good version of their evil family just create a good version and live with them, instead of making a whole damn universe with an evil version of themselves in it? Zelda says she's in there, right beside Harvey, and Hilda doesn't even try to whisper while reading out the spell, which gets Sabrina out of the mirror. Wait a minute. Well, to be fair, they couldn't warp Anibras straight to them, because then she would warp to them in front of Harvey. But magic is done in front of mortals all the time, and the witches get away with it because the mortals are like, man, I am hallucinating. And they could have erased Harvey's memories of seeing her teleport away. So the story could have been done faster, but it wouldn't be as interesting as seeing her mess with the weather. Sure, what's polite of Anibras to not snap Sabrina's neck, and instead patiently wait for Hilda to finish the spell. Harvey would have heard all of this. Instead, he feels the need to ask why Sabrina's aunts are walking around with a mirror. And it wasn't explained that Zelda casts a spell to make him deaf temporarily. Sabrina just tells Harvey that they're a bit eccentric, instead of saying that they just bought a mirror and are taking it home. No, instead insult the people who just saved you. Sabrina would have done people a favor if she had used magic against her evil twin so she couldn't move anymore. But I guess she and her aunts would be morally opposed to that, and so she didn't bother, because she'd be told to undo it. I guess they'd be morally opposed to brainwashing her to be nice, too. As I assume a spy witch will erase Harvey's memory of what Anibras did, since the heroes aren't feeling like it. Hilda decides to have a picnic. And the people whistling at Hilda and Zelda are just the reflections. They wish they could meet real men like them. Why do they think they aren't real? They're clearly self-aware. Why did Anibras call Sabrina's universe the real world? Wouldn't her universe be real to her? This is dehumanizing. There's a story in the Sabrina sitcom where Sabrina was trapped in a mirror. It was explained that she was trapped in her own bad mood, and she had to cheer up her friends in it to get back home. So that was interesting, but very confusing. Of course, it's interesting on its own to see the comics take on an idea. I just hope the comic did this idea first, instead of it being lazy. In the next story, we start out seeing Sabrina asleep on her magic book again, instead of on a pillow. You'd think if you were a witch, you could just zap yourself to your bed the second you feel like sleeping instead of taking a nap on your book. Because you could just zap yourself back to the book the instant you want to. Zelda's just finding this amusing. And Salem said he had a suspicion that it was lip gloss causing those pages to stick. It's so weird that Sabrina has pillows on her bed that have a happy and sad face, especially the sad face. At least that's unique. Sabrina tells Zelda that she fell asleep memorizing spells. Zelda's considerate enough to tell her that her traditional schooling comes first. Then we see Sabrina tired in school. Let me guess. The plot will be about her casting spells in her sleep, which just brings up the question of how the fuck that can still be possible. Something as dangerous as sleep casting would be magically made impossible for all witches by the Witches' Council a long time ago before it would drive the witches to extinction. Why has Sabrina never sleep cast before? Maybe it's only happening now because she was up late and fell asleep memorizing spells, in particular, for the first time. And she almost just learned about being a witch, so of course it's the first time. We saw her stay up all night dancing with Salem one time, and who knows if she sleep cast after that, but here, she was feeling herself conscious with spells and fell asleep. But the point is, magic should be able to tell whether its user is asleep or not. Otherwise, it'd be ridiculously dangerous every time a witch fell asleep. She feels like falling asleep in a zoology class. I sure wish my high school had that kind of class. That sounds more like a college course. She's bored when her teacher keeps talking about gorillas. But if she finds zoology boring, I guess she took the class without knowing she'd find it boring, and didn't decide to drop out of the class and take another one, out of stubbornness. She falls asleep in class as her teacher tells her that the eastern lowland gorilla is found in the rainforests of the Congo. I assume that's true, and I hope it is, because we get nothing out of this interesting dialogue if it was false. Although there's only so interesting it can be if he barely gets to tell us anything. Sabrina goes to sleep in class, and instantly starts talking in her sleep. I don't care how tired you are, you would not fall asleep that deeply that fast. I don't know, maybe witches are able to fall asleep right away as soon as they try, as issue 0 implied. But all she wanted was a nap. She'd have to know she would be woken up if she tried to get away with dreaming in class. Harvey's considerate enough to wake up Sabrina, but by that point she's already said a spell, and luckily for her, Harvey only heard the gorilla part of it. Because of the spell, the teacher suddenly gets really hairy arms and he decides to run out of the class and Sabrina giggles. I guess she doesn't like her teacher very much. And hopefully that's for a very good reason. If her spell was meant to turn him into a gorilla, why didn't he turn into one right away? Witches can erase any evidence of their magic in front of mortals, so there'd be no point giving the already obviously magical transformation a delay. Because even the hairy arms part completely gave it away. Harvey goes to the restroom and finds out it was occupied by his teacher, who's now gorilla. Why does he still have a tie? I guess the tie was the only part of his clothing that didn't get destroyed from him outgrowing it. Makes sense. Harvey's considerate enough to run back to his class to warn them to make a run for it, rather than just running away alone, risking his life in the process. We need a lot more moments like this with him to establish what his character is supposed to be in this comic. Amy assumes that the gorilla must have done something with Mr. Bunsen because he's got his necktie, and she doesn't question why he's able to wear it. And I found it shocking and amusing that Sabrina was actually asleep during all of this, and the gorilla walked up to her and grunted. Harvey was able to wake her up just fine, so you'd think all of this would wake her up. Then, for no reason at all, the gorilla picks up and kidnaps Sabrina when she's asleep. It's a reference to King Kong, which did this as a reference to an unfortunately common myth about gorillas wanting to do something worse than that. Wow, it's considerate of Amy to decide to go tell the principal about the gorilla after he kidnaps Sabrina. Although she's acting out of self-preservation as well, hoping that gorilla will be gotten rid of for her sake. Harvey's really heroic here because he insists on staying here to come up with a way to rescue her. He thinks he has to ask someone smart about how to lure a gorilla. Eddie just has a cliche response that he must need some bananas. But the cafeteria is out. Then Eddie finds banana pudding mix. That's a bit more creative. So Harvey gets the idea to put it all in the biggest garbage can he can find, to make the biggest batch of pudding the school's ever seen. I guess Eddie isn't that much smarter than him, because if he was the smart one, why didn't he come up with this idea? But I'd rather Harvey get to be competent and impress me as a main character of his own. See, this is how Harvey would be if he was smart. The banana pudding acts as a smelling salt to wake Sabrina up, which is at least creative. And when the gorilla finally goes for the pudding, she thinks that this could be the break she's looking for, and when it jumps into the pudding, she uses magic to cancel the spell. Amy asks where the gorilla is, and Sabrina pulls the gorilla costume out of the pudding and lies to Mr. Bunsen was just demonstrating gorilla behavior to bring his lesson alive. That still freaked out the students in the class. So wouldn't this just get him fired? I assume the memories of this will be wiped, so wouldn't. So good thing we won't have to read about that happening to him, because that wouldn't be fair. Sabrina says he hit that pudding awful hard as an excuse for why he doesn't remember being a gorilla, naturally, because his brain was different at that point. And he relatably tastes the pudding while asking if anyone knows where a good tire swing is so that he can relax. And the story ends there. I'm surprised that she only cast one spell in her sleep. I thought there would be more variety in the story than that. But I'm glad it ended when it did, because it feels too arbitrary that sleep casting is even possible. People don't tend to say full, understandable sentences in their sleep. No sleep talking would result in a proper spell being cast. It'd just be mumbling and nonsense. It'd make more sense if Amy was the one turned into a gorilla, because she doesn't like Amy. Amy could be asked a question about zoology by the teacher, and she could be mean to Sabrina. In the next story, a delivery man brings a delivery to Sabrina for one of her aunts, somehow not knowing which one ordered it. And Sabrina says that she'll sign for it. Why won't they just zap it up? He delivers a potted plant, and out of nowhere, the plant whispers to Sabrina, calling her cheapskate, and tells her to tip the delivery man. Sabrina then assumes that the guy was a ventriloquist, only making it seem like the plant was talking. And it takes until the delivery man takes off, after thankfully being tipped, for Sabrina to finally realize that the plant was talking. You'd think she'd know immediately because the plant would have a different voice than the mortal delivery man who delivered it to her. If he was a witch, he would have come in through the closet. I wish I knew if she gave him a good tip. She knows the delivery man doesn't know who Hilda and Zelda are, so why would the delivery man say this? And the plant calls her a family-friendly version of dipshit. A witch says, "A talking plant? It can't be!" I wish she explained that the reason she was so doubtful of the idea from the start was that it was delivered by a mortal. She is a ditz. Salem greets him as Cousin Fern, which I guess is the nickname that he got after being transformed into a plant. Because who would name their kid Fern? And it turns out he knows Salem, and says that he sees he's still a cat. This is amusing to see. I just noticed that there's little black holes to give him eyes and a mouth. And even emotes. And they're so small that it makes sense that they weren't noticed right away. Logic prevails because he wasn't somehow born into her family as a fern, and instead Enchanter turned him into one. He used to do her landscaping, until he let her flowers get too droopy. It's good that that's explained, so we know why she turned him into a fern specifically. Then we see Amy thinking that she's missing some of her history notes for tomorrow's test, and she figures that Sabrina has all of them, because she thinks Sabrina's the nerd who has nothing else to do during class. Sabrina's been an idiot this whole comic, so it's confused that even the comic keeps trying to tell us that she's a smart nerd. It shows a lack of thought by the writers. And this also contradicts Amy's character earlier. Amy was convinced that she'd get an A. She doesn't think she needs to study. Now all of a sudden she thinks she needs to study? Then she sees Sabrina talking to a houseplant and plans on telling everyone about it. She knocks at the door and expects Sabrina, after all of the mistreatment she put her through, to allow her to borrow her history notes for the test tomorrow. Huh? And Sabrina gladly agrees, when she's supposed to hate Amy. And for all she knows, Amy would keep the notes or rip them up, which I wouldn't put past her at this point since she already takes every opportunity to mistreat her. She also insults the plant, calling it not smart enough to carry out an intelligent conversation. Why would she insult a plant? Fern can't resist the urge to satisfyingly yell at her, "Blow it out your kazoo, girly." So she screams and runs away. That is the most badass plant ever. Although it's very fiction-y that he says kazoo. I don't take that stuff from anyone, plant or animal. He talks as if he's been insulted by plants before. Maybe he goes to a support group with other people who are turned into plants. Sure is sweet of Enchantra to have the transformed people still able to talk now that I think about it. I guess there's a limit to how evil she is. Maybe she wants them to still be able to complain about the situation. So it's more like she's sadistic and wants to hear the whining. I'm guessing Amy had her memory wiped to this off screen. Unless the spy witches were very busy. Then Zelda shows up in a cool outfit not fitting her personally and hugs Fern, who calls her and Zelda his two favorite cousins. It was nice of her to hug a plant. And it was nice of her to say that he's looking lush. He says that he's in love. I chuckled a little bit at the very idea because he just looks like a normal plant. He's been talking to a spruce who used to be a Bruce. Oh, so the Fern's a girl. Either that or, nah, this comic's too gutless for that. Well, the plant doesn't look like a girl anyways. Like, just because he's a plant doesn't mean it makes sense that he'd suddenly be attracted to spruces. He's not even a spruce. Fern was on her way to Florida to join Bruce and thought she'd stop by and say hi. Sabrina's completely genre blind because even by this point in the comic, she assumes that everyone in school will know that the plant talked. She should be used to the idea that everyone ends up magically forgetting about supernatural events by now. Why didn't she erase Amy's memory of that personally? Why are they taking it seriously? So seriously that Zelda plans on coming up with a science project for Sabrina to explain all away. Zelda says that she should put a little speaker in the pot so that she could talk to them when she's not around. And she could lie that this is what Amy heard, an experiment to make plants grow by being talked to. Then the story cuts to a few weeks later, which is fast-pacing. Sabrina got first place prize. I guess all the other entries sucked, because you'd think Dilton would have entered. The story ends with Sabrina and Hilda inexplicably fainting because Fern moved back to the greenhouse after her boyfriend sucked. So much for a happy ending. The first story is by Dan Parent and is the comics version of a story where Sabrina gets trapped in a universe in a mirror by a mirror evil twin. The story doesn't even try to make sense. No explanation for why the mirror is like this, complete with giving Sabrina's aunt male reflections. If Zelda always hated that about it, why didn't she do something about it? Why didn't she get rid of the mirror? Would you make this entire plot impossible and give Sabrina a mirror she likes instead? How is Sabrina's reflection self-aware and able to live in her own world? Let alone evil. She looks the same as her. You'd think her brain would be the same as well, with the same DNA, especially since her uncles aren't abusive at all. Her evil twin is a sociopath with her powers, immediately making me question why her powers weren't taken away. Crone was depowered, so why wasn't she? Eventually, Hilda sneaks up on her with a mirror to trap her after the mirror makes noise to alert her to it in the attic, because not Katrina didn't destroy the mirror for some reason. I don't see why Neighbors wasted time switching places with Sabrina. Why couldn't she have fun in her own universe? What made her think any other universe would be fun? The second story, by Bill Gallagher, unfortunately had less variety than I expected. Sabrina only sleepcasts one spell, which has her teacher turn into a gorilla with an unusually delayed reaction and inexplicably kidnap her. That's all that happened. But it was worth it because I got to see Harvey acting like a competent, considerate, and brave hero who figured out how to save Sabrina. Kinda makes me wish this was his first appearance. He made a whole bunch of banana pudding to lure the gorilla into it, and Sabrina woke up in time to turn the teacher back to normal in the pudding, and lie that he just put on a gorilla costume. I wish it was explained how the hell Sabrina fell asleep deeply enough to start sleep-talking instantly, and how sleep-casting is even possible when sleep talk is not understandable enough to form a proper spell, and sleep casting would be made impossible by the Witches' Council before the witches wiped themselves out as a species. The story didn't make sense to happen. I've had the story since I was a kid. This is one of the stories in the Archie comics I had. But maybe because of the whole King Kong ripoff, where she was kidnapped by a gorilla just for the sake of King Kong when a lot of other stuff do that as well, maybe that's why I didn't immediately remember it. The third story was also by Bill, and was about Amy screaming because of Sabrina's talking plant cousin, and Zelda deciding to make Sabrina think up a cover story for what really happened, which Amy shouldn't have bought because clearly the plant couldn't have had Sabrina's voice. Not to mention Sabrina didn't have the guts to say that to her in the first place. The story didn't explain that a witch was using magic to force Amy to believe that. Shouldn't the witches all be used to the idea that everyone forgets about magic after witnessing it? It's not showing self-awareness that they decided to trick Amy, just assuming that she still remembers at this point. I guess the reason she still remembers is that the spy witches were really busy and didn't see her. At least it wasn't shown that everyone at school believed Amy about the talking plant. Sabrina shouldn't have assumed that'd be the case. You'd think Sabrina would just go to Amy and erase her memory of what happened, not do a project.